You ever realize you've been living someone else's life without even noticing? Because that's what it felt like when my manager told me, stop complaining about money. He said it with that half smile people use when they're daring you to argue back. Except I didn't. I just stood there, staring at him, wondering if he even remembered the 52,800 that had quietly disappeared from my paycheck over the last 3 years. My name's Ethan. I'm 29, a financial analyst in a mid-sized tech firm. I've spent the past 5 years buried under spreadsheets, expense reports, and quarterly forecasts. I used to think I was building a career, something steady, respectable. My parents still tell people I work with numbers. They don't know those numbers nearly ruined me. When I joined the company, I was assigned to a manager named Robert Lang. You'd like him at first. Everyone does. Mid-40s, confident, laughs too loud, but never in a way that feels fake. He's the kind of guy who remembers your birthday, buys lunch for the team, and tells stories about back when the company was smaller and hungrier. He called me kid even after my promotion. I didn't mind it. Not then. It made me feel seen. Robert liked to say that success was about optics. If you looked like you belonged, eventually you would. His version of optics meant client dinners, premium flights, and hotel bars that charged $20 for a cocktail. It's all company money, he'd say, sliding receipts across my desk for reimbursement. Just make sure it's coded right. And I did. Every single time. At first it was small. Uber rides to the airport, breakfast meetings, but then there were things that didn't fit. Spa charges, golf trips labeled as leadership retreats, invoices from restaurants in cities we'd never visited. I told myself it wasn't my place to question it. I was just the guy entering numbers. Still, I started noticing my own finances shrinking. Robert's travel reimbursements would hit his account before mine. He'd get bonuses for exemplary client engagement, projects I'd actually done most of the work for. When payroll errors happened, they always seemed to fall on my side. Just an oversight, he'd say. You'll get it next cycle. I didn't. One Friday, after another 12-hour day closing the quarter, I was buying gas on an overdrafted debit card. My rent was late. My savings, gone. My manager drove by in a new BMW that he called a little reward for surviving Q4. I remember standing there, the nozzle still in the tank, thinking how ridiculous it was that the man whose expenses I processed every week didn't even flinch at the price of premium gas while I was praying the pump wouldn't decline my card. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was how normal it all felt. How every favor, every "I owe you one," kept me chained to the illusion that loyalty was some kind of currency. Robert liked to play the mentor. You're sharp, Ethan, he'd say, hand on my shoulder. Stick with me and you'll be running your own team soon. So when he started asking me to front a few things, the company will reimburse you next week, I promise. I believed him. It was easier than believing the alternative, that I was being used. The first time was a client dinner. His corporate card had an issue. I paid the $480 tab. 2 weeks later, still no reimbursement. Then came the hotel mix-up, another $600. Then a temporary travel freeze that left me covering flight upgrades, dry cleaning, even his conference registration fees. He always had a reason, always a smile, always a promise to fix it soon. By the time I finally looked through my bank app and added up the damage, it wasn't just a few missed repayments. It was $52,800. $52,800. My savings, my bonus, my emergency fund, gone. I told myself I was helping the team, that I was investing in my future, that the universe would balance the books eventually. Then came that Tuesday morning. We were in the break room, stale coffee between us, fluorescent lights buzzing like flies. I told Robert I couldn't keep covering his expenses, that I was in debt, behind on bills, exhausted. He didn't even look up from his phone. Stop complaining about money, he said. That's the mindset of a loser. The words hit harder than I expected. Maybe because they were true. Not the loser part, but the money part. I'd stopped thinking about my own life years ago. My time, my paycheck, my energy. All of it had become a line item in someone else's report. He finished his coffee, clapped me on the shoulder, and walked away. You're lucky to have this job, Ethan. Don't overthink it. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at my laptop, at the endless rows of transactions I'd processed with his name attached. And for the first time, I didn't see numbers. I saw proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that he'd been stealing. Proof that the system wasn't broken. It was designed that way. I didn't know it then, but that spreadsheet on my screen would become the start of something much bigger. Something that would cost him everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the blue glow of my laptop, scrolling through years of expense reports that I'd filed, approved, and forgotten. Each one was a little betrayal of my time, my effort, my belief that I was part of something honest. By 3 a.m., I had a spreadsheet longer than a novel. Flights to Miami labeled as client summits, a $2,300 training expense paid to a resort in Napa, and Uber receipts from cities Robert never even visited. Every cell was a confession. Every dollar, a line of evidence against me. Because my name was on the approvals. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding. So the next morning, I printed 3 of the worst reports and walked into his office. Robert was in his chair, scrolling through his phone, smiling like a man who's never had to worry about anything. His office smelled like cedar and power, polished shelves, signed golf balls, a framed quote on the wall. Leadership is about trust. Hey, I started, trying to sound casual. I think there's a mix-up in these reimbursements. Some of the charges... He didn't even glance at the papers. You stress too much, Ethan. Just reclassify them. Call them client retention expenses. But these were personal, I said quietly. Flights for your wife. Hotel stays under your name. It's not company business. That made him look up. Slowly. The smile faded, but not from guilt. From annoyance. Do you know how many zeros you have in your paycheck, Ethan? He asked, leaning back. And you're worried about a few dinners? A few dinners? I laughed, but it came out shaky. It's over $50,000. He set his phone down, folded his hands. $50,000? You act like that's real money. That's the cost of doing business. My heart was pounding. It's fraud, he smirked. No, it's experience. You think the execs don't know how this works? You think they didn't start the same way? You want to make it in this company, you learn when to keep your mouth shut. I stared at him, speechless. Here's some advice, he continued. Stop complaining about money. It makes you sound small. You want a raise? Earn it. Learn to play the game. Something inside me snapped. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was humiliation. Maybe it was finally realizing that I'd spent 3 years protecting a thief. I picked up the papers and left without another word. By the time I reached my cubicle, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely log in. That afternoon, HR called. They said there'd been an irregularity in last quarter's financials. Something about duplicate reimbursements. Robert had flagged my name for clerical inconsistencies. And just like that, the hunter became the prey. They didn't accuse me directly, but the tone said enough. We just need to review your authorizations, Ethan. It's probably nothing. Probably nothing. 2 words that can end a career. I spent the next 2 weeks working in a fog, waiting for the hammer to fall. Robert acted like nothing had happened. He smiled in meetings, complimented my work, even joked about buying me lunch, to make up for all those late nights. But his eyes said something else. They said, "You'll never win this." The audit dragged on for months. Emails from compliance, requests for clarifications, random spot checks. My work was picked apart line by line. Meanwhile, Robert's name never appeared in any of it. He'd insulated himself perfectly. Layers of approvals, delegation chains, and vague memos that all pointed downward. To me? And yet, something about his confidence made me suspicious. He wasn't just untouchable, he was certain of it, like he knew the system would protect him because it always had. So I decided to stop fighting defensively. If I was going to go down, I'd go down swinging, with data. Every night after work, I stayed late, pretending to catch up on reports. In reality, I was quietly downloading everything: receipts, travel logs, internal memos, reimbursement chains. The company's archive was a graveyard of forgotten evidence. By week 3, I had terabytes of proof. One folder labeled Project Sunrise contained transactions that linked Robert's personal accounts to vendor kickbacks. Another showed internal emails between him and a regional director, messages about adjusting numbers before quarterly reports went to investors. No, it wasn't just fraud. It was a network, and I was sitting in the middle of it. Every instinct told me to walk away, but I couldn't. Not after the look on his face that day in his office, that smugness, that certainty that I'd stay quiet because that's what people like me do. So I kept digging, and the deeper I went, the clearer it became. The company's culture didn't punish corruption. It rewarded it. That realization didn't break me. It clarified me. The night before the audit's final review, I made a decision. I wasn't going to expose him to HR. HR worked for him. I was going to expose him to the people who couldn't ignore it. I encrypted the evidence, stored backups in cloud drives, and scheduled an anonymous report to the Corporate Compliance Board. The external one, the one that handled legal investigations. As I hit send, I felt my chest tighten, not fear release. For the first time in years, I wasn't covering his tracks. I was writing my own, but that was just the beginning. The email went out at 2:17 a.m. By 2:19, my hands were still frozen over the keyboard. I stared at the confirmation window, report successfully submitted to the Compliance Oversight Board. And for the first time in months, the office felt quiet. Not peaceful quiet, the kind of quiet that happens before thunder. I expected guilt. I expected panic. But what I felt was control. For once, the numbers belonged to me. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. Robert strolled in late, expensive cologne, Bluetooth headset, that same easy arrogance. He made a show of tossing his keys onto his desk and patting my shoulder. "Morning, champ. Don't look so serious. We're making money here." I smiled back. "Sure we are." At 10:03 a.m., I noticed it. A meeting invitation on my calendar from Corporate Compliance Department. Urgent review. Robert's name was on it, too. He leaned across the aisle toward me, waving his phone. "You get this, too?" "Yeah," I said, pretending to sound confused. "Must be about the audit." "Don't worry," he grinned. "They do these all the time. Paper tigers." The meeting was set for 2 p.m. By lunch, people were whispering. 2 board members from the External Audit Division had flown in unexpectedly. The CFO canceled his afternoon meetings. IT started pulling server access logs. Something was happening, and for once, it wasn't me being blamed. At 1:55, I walked into the glass conference room and felt the air shift. The blinds were drawn. 3 people sat on one side of the table. The compliance director, a company lawyer, and a woman I didn't recognize who wore an expression that could cut through steel. Robert entered 2 minutes later, charm loaded like ammunition. "Afternoon, everyone," he said, flashing that effortless smile. "Always happy to cooperate." "Please take a seat," the woman said evenly. "Mr. Lang, Mr. Cole, we'll be asking you both some questions regarding recent financial irregularities." Robert chuckled. "Irregularities? Sounds serious." "It is," she replied. What followed was 90 minutes of precision. Emails, transactions, timestamps, all lined up like dominoes. They started with the obvious: duplicate reimbursements. Then vendor payments routed to shell companies. Then the hammer: personal transactions tied to his home address and family accounts. Each time, Robert tried to deflect. It was approved. It was part of a client initiative. Ethan handled that, didn't you? But for every excuse, they had an answer. Every file he mentioned, they already had a copy from my report. When they reached the training retreat expenses, Robert finally lost composure. This is ridiculous. You're wasting time chasing paperwork instead of focusing on revenue. The woman didn't flinch. Revenue doesn't come from fraud, Mr. Lang. The silence that followed felt electric. Then she turned to me. Mr. Cole, are you aware of any deliberate manipulation of records under your supervision? I met her gaze. I am now. Robert slammed his hand on the table. This is a witch hunt. You think this kid sent you those files out of honesty? He's bitter. He's broke. The compliance director interrupted him calmly. We received the report from a verified external submission system. It matches corporate audit evidence and metadata. Timestamps. This isn't personal, Robert. It's procedural. For the first time in 3 years, I watched him shrink. His face reddened. His shoulders sagged. He looked small, like a man who'd spent too long believing his own mythology. When it was over, they escorted him out. No shouting, no dramatic scene. Just a quiet, efficient removal. Badge deactivated, security waiting by the elevator. I sat there, hands still, breathing through the noise in my chest. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I didn't. I felt empty. Back at my desk, people pretended not to stare. The rumor mill moved faster than email. Everyone knew within the hour. By 5 p.m., the Slack channels were alive with speculation. Did you hear about Lang? Corporate fraud, apparently. I thought he was untouchable. I shut my laptop at 5:31 and walked out without saying goodbye. Outside, the city felt different, louder, more alive, almost like it had been holding its breath with me. I wandered into a cafe, ordered black coffee, and sat by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Ethan, Robert's voice rasped on the other end. He sounded drunk, or maybe just broken. You think this fixes anything? You think you're the hero now? I didn't respond. You ruined me, he said. You don't know who I know. This isn't over. I ended the call and turned my phone face down. Outside, traffic kept moving. Nobody stopped. Nobody cared. That night, I opened my email. A message from compliance. Your cooperation in this investigation is appreciated. Your employment status remains in good standing. Further updates to follow. No praise, no apology, just bureaucracy. But it meant one thing. I was free. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the spreadsheet that had started it all. For years, those numbers had defined my worth. They'd been proof that I mattered, that my effort meant something. But now they were just digits, lifeless and hollow. I deleted the file. Every copy, every backup, gone. And for the first time, I slept through the night. They thought I was gone. I wasn't. 6 months later, I still wake up before sunrise. Old habits die hard, the reflex of a man who spent years arriving early just to look dependable. Only now I wake up because I want to, not because I'm afraid someone will notice if I don't. The office looks different these days. Robert's corner suite is empty, glass walls stripped of his framed golf trophies and motivational quotes. The blinds stay open now, and sunlight spills across the floor, where his shadow used to fall. He's gone. Officially terminated due to gross misconduct. Unofficially blacklisted across the industry. I didn't read the internal memo when it came through, but I saw the line that mattered. Employee responsible for internal report remains anonymous and in good standing. That was me, the kid who used to approve his expenses. After the scandal, the company moved me to a smaller department. A quiet desk job with less pressure. Fewer late nights, no politics. Some called it a demotion. I called it freedom. The first month after everything imploded, I expected chaos. Angry calls, awkward stares, maybe even retaliation. But what I got was silence. The kind that doesn't hurt anymore. Robert tried to contact me twice, first through email, we need to talk, then through a LinkedIn message that simply read, You won't make it far without me. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because by then something had shifted. The company had hired a new compliance head, a quiet woman named Claire who worked like she was cleaning up after a storm. One afternoon, she stopped by my desk, leaned against the partition, and said, "You did the right thing, you know." I looked up, unsure how to respond. She smiled faintly. Most people wouldn't have. Then she walked away. That night, I sat at home on my small balcony, watching the city hum beneath me. My apartment was still the same. Second-hand furniture, cheap coffee, the same crooked picture frame above the desk. But something inside it had changed. It finally felt mine. I stopped checking my bank app every morning. I stopped scanning receipts before paying for groceries. The anxiety that used to live in my chest like a permanent tenant, gone. I started cooking again, reading, sleeping, and little by little I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Revenge had felt like survival at first, like setting fire to the walls that trapped me. But once the flames died down, all that was left was space. Space to breathe. Then one afternoon, an email arrived from an unfamiliar sender. Cole E. Former employee reference check. It was from an external firm, a competitor. They were vetting candidates for a senior analyst role. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam until I saw the name attached. Robert Lang. My first instinct was laughter. Sharp, disbelieving laughter that spilled out louder than it should have. Then I went quiet. I sat there for a long minute, staring at the screen. There was a text box for optional comment. I typed, "Robert Lang was instrumental in teaching me what integrity means, mostly by showing me what happens when you lose it." I hit send. No anger, no satisfaction, just truth. That night, I walked past the office building where it all began. The lobby lights glowed the same sterile yellow, but it no longer looked like a temple. It looked like what it always was, a place where people pretended numbers were more important than people. I stopped at the window, my reflection framed against the glass. For years, I thought the only way to win was to climb higher. But maybe winning wasn't about reaching the top. Maybe it was about walking away before the climb consumed you. My phone buzzed with a new email. Subject, offer letter, compliance advisor, different company, better pay, remote work, a new start. I smiled. Not the forced kind, the quiet, private kind that doesn't need witnesses. Before bed, I opened a blank spreadsheet. Old reflex. I named it Balance Sheet Personal. Under assets, I wrote freedom, peace of mind, self-respect. Under liabilities, I left it empty. Then I closed the laptop and let the darkness settle. When people ask why I left my old job, I tell them the truth, just not the whole truth. I say, the math didn't add up anymore, and it's always enough. Because deep down, I know this. Some debts can't be paid with money. They're settled in silence. When you finally stop chasing approval, stop covering for someone else's life, and decide your own is worth the cost. For the first time in years, the numbers make sense, and so do I.